Every significant battle in a person's life is won or lost, not in the external world, but in the 6 inches between stimulus and response. The person who controls that space controls everything that follows. Most people believe that emotional reactions are simply the natural, automatic responses of a human being encountering the circumstances of their life, that they arrive unbidden, are experienced as they come, and are expressed as the honest communication of what is genuinely felt in the moment of their occurrence. This understanding of emotional experience, however genuinely it reflects how emotion feels from the inside, misses something that the master strategist has always understood, and that most people discover only after significant cost. Emotions are not simply experiences, they are strategic territory. What most people don't realize is that their emotional responses are the primary mechanism through which other people gain access to the dimensions of their psychology that are most consequential for any interaction's outcome. The anxiety that arrives when a specific pressure is applied reveals where the pressure points are. The anger that surfaces when a specific accusation is made reveals which accusations carry enough proximity to genuine concern to produce activation rather than indifference. The hope that emerges when a specific kind of attention is offered reveals where the unmet needs are located that strategic attention can be calibrated to exploit. Every unmanaged emotional response is a disclosure, and disclosures, in any environment where strategic positioning is occurring, consciously or not, provide the observant party with information that shapes every subsequent move they make relative to the person who disclosed. Pay attention to what this reveals about the fundamental nature of emotional self-management, because it reveals something that transforms the entire motivation for developing it. Emotional discipline is not primarily a psychological health practice. It is a strategic security practice. It is the specific habit of not providing others with the real-time map of your interior that unmanaged emotional expression continuously updates and transmits to everyone paying close enough attention to read it. This is where the understanding of provocation as tactical weapon becomes the most immediately practical insight available to anyone navigating complex social or professional environment. Because once the strategic function of provocation is understood, once it is recognized not as the spontaneous expression of another person's feeling, but as a specific mechanism for transferring discomfort and extracting emotional response, the experience of being provoked changes completely. Most people experience provocation as an event that happens to them, an external stimulus that arrives with enough force to produce an internal reaction that feels both involuntary and justified. Those who understand human nature experience the same event differently. They experience it as information, specifically as information about what the provoking party is attempting to accomplish, what emotional response they are trying to produce, and what that response, if provided, would hand them in terms of strategic advantage. The anger the provocation was designed to produce would confirm that the provocation located a genuine pressure point. The defensive response it was designed to activate would communicate that the accusation it contained was close enough to a genuine vulnerability to require defense. The destabilization it was designed to create would demonstrate that the provoking party has the ability to compromise the quality of decision making in the person they are provoking, which is the most consequential capability any opponent can possess. Few people understand that the most effective response to any deliberate provocation is therefore not the most emotionally authentic one. It is the one that provides the least useful information to the party who deployed the provocation, which is almost always the calm, specific, unactivated response that communicates, through its very quality, that the provocation did not reach what it was aimed at. This connects directly to the peace as power position, which reveals that inner peace is not simply the absence of conflict or the luxury of comfortable circumstances. It is a strategic achievement with specific and measurable competitive consequences. Most people pursue inner peace as a psychological objective, something to be sought for its own sake, for the quality of life it produces and the suffering its absence creates. Those who understand human nature know that inner peace is simultaneously a strategic objective, one that confers specific advantages in every environment where decision quality, emotional composure, and resistance to manipulation determine outcomes. The person who is genuinely at peace with their circumstances, who has developed an internal stability that does not depend on external conditions conforming to their preferences, makes fundamentally better decisions than the person whose internal stability is contingent on the external environment cooperating with what they need it to be. They make better decisions because they can see more clearly. Emotional disturbance is not simply uncomfortable, it is cognitively distorting. It narrows the perceptual field to the object of disturbance, reduces the availability of the long-term perspective that good strategic decisions require, and produces a quality of thinking organized around the management of the disturbance rather than around the accurate assessment of the situation that the disturbance obscured. The wisest leaders recognize that composure is therefore not a secondary consideration, not something to be attended to after the primary strategic work has been completed. It is the precondition for the primary strategic work being done with the quality that consequential decisions deserve. Pay attention to what the peace as power position means in practical terms, because it means something that most people find counterintuitive when they first encounter it. The person who genuinely does not need a particular outcome in order to maintain their internal stability negotiates that outcome from a position of strength that the person who desperately needs it can never occupy, not because they care less about the outcome, but because their ability to think clearly about how to achieve it is not being compromised by the emotional distortion that need, when it becomes desperate, consistently produces. The strongest position is always the one from which you can afford to walk away, and the person who has built genuine inner peace has built that position, not through indifference, but through the specific development of an internal stability that does not require any particular external outcome to remain intact. There is a discipline that the master strategist develops that most people never consciously identify as a discipline, because it operates in the space between experience and expression, between what is felt internally and what is communicated externally, in a gap so brief and so rarely examined that most people are unaware it exists at all. It is the discipline of the delayed response. Most people believe that authentic communication requires immediate expression, that the honest, direct response to whatever one is experiencing is the most genuine and therefore the most valuable form of engagement available in any interaction. Those who understand human nature know that this belief, however, genuinely it reflects admirable values, consistently produces a specific and consequential strategic vulnerability. The immediate response is almost always the response that the situation engineered, rather than the response that the situation deserves. The situation that produced the provocation was constructed, consciously or through the automatic patterns of someone who has learned what responses their behavior reliably generates, to produce a specific emotional activation. And the immediate response to that activation, however authentic it feels, is simply the completion of the circuit that the provocation was designed to create. What most people don't realize is that the gap between stimulus and response is the precise location where strategic intelligence either operates or fails. The person who responds immediately hands the initiative to whoever engineered the stimulus. The person who creates a deliberate pause, who allows the initial activation to occur without immediately translating it into behavior, retains the initiative and gains access to a quality of response that the initial activation, unchecked, would never have produced. Pay attention to what this pause makes possible in practical terms. because it makes possible something that reactive response systematically forecloses: the accurate assessment of what is actually happening beneath the surface presentation of whatever event produced the activation. The consideration of what response would best serve the long-term interests of the person delivering it, rather than the immediate interests of the person who engineered the situation, and the specific quality of composure that communicates to everyone observing the interaction that this person's behavior is determined by their own considered judgment rather than by whatever stimulus the environment most recently delivered. Few people understand that the delayed response is not simply a tactic for improving the quality of individual interactions. It is practiced consistently across the full range of situations that a life presents, the specific mechanism through which the habit of emotional discipline is built. And the habit, once built, changes the baseline from which every future interaction begins, making the quality of composure that required deliberate effort early in the development available automatically in situations where deliberate effort would be most difficult to apply. This is where the energy economics of emotional engagement reveals its connection to everything the delayed response protects. Because emotional energy, the specific resource that genuine intellectual and strategic effectiveness requires, is finite in a way that most people never consciously manage and therefore consistently exhaust. Most people distribute their emotional energy in direct proportion to the intensity with which situations demand it, responding to provocations with the emotional activation, the provocations engineered, engaging conflicts with the full weight of the emotional investment those conflicts activate, and allowing the continuous stream of situations that daily life presents to determine not simply the content, but the quantity of emotional energy consumed in responding to them. Those who understand human nature know that this pattern of distribution, however natural it feels as the simple, authentic engagement with whatever arrives, is a pattern that systematically depletes the resource that every other form of effectiveness requires. The person whose emotional energy is continuously consumed by engineered provocations, manufactured conflicts, and the specific situations that other parties create specifically because they produce emotional activation in this particular person, that person arrives at every genuinely consequential situation depleted. Their capacity for clear thinking has been taxed by the clarity that managing the preceding provocations required. Their patience has been eroded by the patience that tolerating the preceding conflicts demanded. Their composure is effortful where it once was natural, because the preceding emotional engagements consumed the reserve that effortless composure requires. The wisest leaders recognize that protecting emotional energy is not selfishness. It is strategic necessity, the specific resource management practice that ensures the most consequential situations are met with the full quality of engagement they deserve, rather than the residual capacity that the preceding emotional consumption left available. This connects directly to detachment as strategic clarity, which is the specific perceptual quality that protected emotional energy makes consistently accessible and that emotional depletion consistently forecloses. Most people believe that genuine engagement with any situation requires emotional investment in its outcome, that caring about a result and being emotionally attached to it are the same thing, and that the person who approaches a situation without attachment is therefore the person who doesn't care about its outcome. Those who understand human nature know that this belief confuses two things that are genuinely and consequentially different. Caring about an outcome, genuinely wanting it, working toward it, investing skill and effort in its achievement, does not require being emotionally attached to it in the specific sense of having one's internal stability contingent on whether it arrives. The detachment that produces strategic clarity is not indifference. It is the specific quality of observational composure that allows a situation to be seen as it actually is, rather than as the emotional investment in its outcome causes it to appear. The person who is emotionally attached to a particular outcome perceives the situation through the distorting lens of that attachment, overweighting information that supports the desired outcome, underweighting information that challenges it, and consistently arriving at assessments that are more accurate representations of what they hope is true than of what the available evidence actually indicates. The detached observer sees the same situation without this distortion. They receive the unfavorable information with the same cognitive weight as the favorable information. They assess the probability of various outcomes against the actual evidence, rather than against the emotional pull of the desired one, and they make decisions from this more accurate assessment, which means they make better decisions, even in situations where their genuine desire for a particular outcome is no different from what the attached person experiences. Pay attention to what this implies for the development of strategic intelligence in practice, because it implies something that most approaches to strategic thinking consistently miss. The limiting factor in most people's strategic thinking is not the sophistication of their analytical frameworks. It is the degree to which their analysis of any significant situation is compromised by the emotional investment they bring to its outcome. And the development of genuine strategic clarity therefore requires not simply better analytical tools, but the specific internal development of the detachment that allows those tools to operate on accurate inputs rather than on the emotionally distorted perceptions that attachment consistently produces. This is where the boundary as information reveals its function as one of the most diagnostically powerful practices available to anyone developing genuine strategic intelligence in their relational environment. Most people establish limits in their relationships because certain behaviors are unacceptable, and they experience the violation of those limits as painful evidence that the relationship is failing to honor what they communicated it required. This understanding of boundaries is not wrong, but it is incomplete in a way that consistently causes people to miss the most strategically significant information that boundary setting produces. How people respond to clearly established limits reveals something about their actual intentions, their actual regard for the interests of the person whose limits they are encountering, and the actual nature of their relationship to other people's needs when honoring those needs costs them something that no amount of favorable behavior in situations where honoring limits was costless could ever have revealed. The person who accepts a clearly stated limit gracefully has provided evidence that their behavior in this relationship is genuinely responsive to the other person's needs, rather than simply convenient for their own. The person who challenges, negotiates, minimizes, or repeatedly tests a clearly stated limit has provided evidence about their actual relationship to this other person's needs that no other behavioral signal could communicate as clearly. Most people miss this warning sign because they are focused on the emotional experience of the boundary violation, on the hurt, the frustration, or the disappointment that the test or the challenge produced. The hidden reason this focus is strategically costly is that it directs attention toward the feeling produced by the information rather than toward the information itself. And the information, accurately received and properly weighted, is among the most valuable that any relationship ever provides. There is a reputational effect that consistent emotional composure produces across time that most people never consciously consider as a strategic objective, because they think of composure as a personal quality rather than as a social signal that accumulates through repeated observation into one of the most consequential components of how a person is perceived and treated by everyone in their environment. What most people don't realize is that every interaction in which composure is maintained under genuine pressure is not simply a single, successfully managed moment. It is a data point in an ongoing observation that everyone who witnesses it is continuously conducting, an observation whose accumulated conclusions constitute the specific reputational signal that determines how future interactions with this person will be approached. The person who consistently maintains composure under pressure builds through the accumulation of these data points across sufficient time a reputational signal that communicates something specific to everyone who has observed the pattern, that this person cannot be meaningfully destabilized through the ordinary mechanisms of social and emotional pressure, that provocations aimed at them will not produce the emotional activation that makes manipulation possible, that the investment required to compromise their decision-making through emotional means exceeds what the potential return would justify. This reputational signal functions as a deterrent. It reduces the frequency of provocation attempts, not through any declaration of resistance or any aggressive communication of invulnerability, but through the simple, accumulated evidence of a pattern that has consistently failed to produce the results that provocation is designed to achieve. Few people understand that the compounding effect of consistent composure is therefore not simply the sum of the individual interactions it comprises. It is the deterrent environment that the pattern creates, an environment in which the cost-benefit analysis of attempting to destabilize this person consistently returns an unfavorable result before the attempt is even made. This is where the interior, as the final frontier, reveals the deepest and most consequential dimension of everything examined in this video, because it points toward a form of security that no external arrangement, no strategic positioning, and no accumulated reputational signal can fully replicate. The security of an interior that has been genuinely developed, rather than simply defended. Most people approach psychological security as a defensive project, building walls against the intrusions that would compromise it, managing the external environment to prevent the circumstances that would challenge it, and treating its maintenance as the ongoing work of preventing specific threats from reaching a foundation that was never independently strengthened. Those who understand human nature know that the most durable form of psychological security is not built through defense. It is built through the genuine development of the interior qualities that make external disturbance progressively less capable of reaching what matters. The person who has genuinely developed their interior, who has cultivated the specific qualities of self-knowledge, defined values, emotional discipline, and the patient observation of their own reactive patterns that genuine interior development requires, possesses a form of security that external circumstances cannot remove, because it was never built from external conditions to begin with. Most people spend their lives managing the external environment in the hope that sufficient control of external circumstances will eventually produce the internal peace that genuine interior development would have provided directly. The wisest leaders recognize this inversion for what it is and reverse it. There is a thread that runs through every principle examined in this video. Through emotions as strategic territory, the provocation as tactical weapon, the peace as power position, the discipline of the delayed response, the energy economics of emotional engagement, detachment as strategic, clarity, the boundary as information, the strategic value of selective engagement, the compounding effect of consistent composure, and the interior as the final frontier. And it is not a thread about psychological techniques or emotional management strategies in any conventional sense. It is a thread about sovereignty, specifically about the specific and consequential form of sovereignty that most people spend their entire lives without fully achieving, the sovereignty of a person whose internal experience is genuinely their own, whose responses emerge from their own considered judgment, rather than from the stimuli that their environment engineers, and whose peace does not depend on external circumstances cooperating with what they need those circumstances to be. Most people pursue this sovereignty from the outside, in believing that the right external arrangements, the right relationships, the right circumstances, and the right social environment will eventually produce the internal stability they have been seeking through the management of external conditions. Those who understand human nature know that this sequence is consistently and permanently reversed. The internal stability that produces genuine sovereignty over one's own experience is never the product of favorable external conditions. It is the product of the specific internal development that favorable external conditions would have made unnecessary, which is precisely why most people never develop it. The wisest leaders recognize that protecting one's peace is not a passive project of avoiding the things that disturb it. It is an active, disciplined, and continuous project of developing the interior qualities that make disturbance progressively less capable of reaching what genuinely matters, and of building the specific habits of emotional management, selective engagement, and composure under pressure that transform this interior development from a private aspiration into a publicly observable and strategically consequential reality. Few people understand that the person who has achieved this development is not the person who is never provoked. They are the person for whom provocation has become what the strategist always knew it was. Not a wound, but a signal. Not a disruption, but information. Not an emergency requiring immediate emotional response, but a data point revealing something about the party who deployed it that genuine composure makes possible to receive accurately. True influence begins when others cannot control how you feel, and the person who reaches that position, who has genuinely secured their interior against the ordinary mechanisms of emotional manipulation and social pressure, has achieved something that all the external demonstrations of power in the world can never quite replicate. Power rarely announces itself, and inner sovereignty, the most durable of all forms of power, announces itself least of all. It is simply present in the quality of responses that never arrived reactively, in the decisions that were never compromised by emotional distortion, in the composure that accumulated across enough observed interactions to communicate, without a single declaration, that this person's interior is territory that no external force has ever successfully occupied. That territory was always available to be claimed. It was always built from the inside, and it begins as it has always begun, not with the management of the external world, but with the patient, disciplined, and entirely private development of the world within.